right, good morning. Good morning to our friends on the live stream, HighPoint St. Thomas. Glad you're with us today. If we've not had the pleasure to meet, my name is Keith. I'm the lead pastor here. So glad you're with us, and happy Father's Day to the fathers in the house. Thank you. Thank you for being strong pillars in your homes. Thank you for being strong pillars here in our church. Thank you for being strong pillars in our community. And may the meat of your grill be blessed beyond measure today and all days yet to come. We are in the second week of our summer series, and we're working through the Gospel of Mark. We'll be working through it all summer long. And if you remember last week where we just got it kicked off, the Gospel of Mark, although it has the name of Mark and was written by Mark, in many ways it's Peter's story. Mark and Peter were working together in Rome. Peter was preaching the gospel everywhere he could during this massive time of persecution. And what Peter and Mark and some of the other disciples realized is Peter can't be in multiple places at once, and the message needed to get out more quickly. So Mark essentially transcribed what it was that Peter was talking about. So you'll hear me, if you hear me interchangeably using Peter and Mark, it's kind of one guy telling another guy's story, so that might happen if there's any confusion. And we're working through the Gospel of Mark, and there's some very specific things here. When you think of the Gospels, they're not biographies. It's biographical information about Jesus. I mean, it's following his life, but it's not like each one is primarily an orderly biography. What they are is stories of faith. They're stories of how, in this case, Peter came to believe in Jesus. So as we read through Mark, this is essentially Peter, through his mouthpiece Mark, saying, I believe because. Right? I'm putting my faith in Jesus because. You should put your faith in Jesus because. This is what he did in me. I'm going to live all my days passionately for him because this is what I know to be true about him. I have an eternal hope because I've seen and experienced this. So sometimes when we read the Gospels, we can go like, why aren't they in the same order? And why do some of the authors emphasize different things? It's because it's their personal story of coming to this belief in the Savior of the world. You know, you see with Matthew, right? The thing that kind of, as you read Matthew, that struck him the most, he has more quotes from the Old Testament than any other New Testament book. And you see the thing that struck Matthew was, as an Old Testament guy that understood it, he's going, whoa, he's the fulfillment, right? He understands. He had read about this one to come, and I was like, he's him. So through his story, he's going, look, he fulfilled this, and he fulfilled this. You see John, who describes himself in his own book, and I love it. I'm the disciple that Jesus loved. And what's John saying is, that man did something in my heart that no other person could do. I've had a change of heart where my heart is soft, and I've experienced the love deep down on the inside, and it's because of him. He's telling his story about how Jesus changed him. And then you got Luke, who's a doctor and a scientist in many ways, and he sets out with an orderly account. And he's going, here's why you can trust in God, because Jesus, boom, 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 and lays it all out. And then, of course, we have Mark / Peter with their reason for believing, and why, as we're going to see in the weeks to come and start today, is because what he saw happen, right? He's doesn't care about genealogies, not exactly the touchiest, feeliest kind of guy ever, and worried about what's going on in his heart. He's looking like he's watching an action movie and going, whoa, he did that. Whoa, he did that. Whoa, he did that. So each gospel person has kind of their own account of how they came to faith. Let me just tell you this, your story matters. You don't have to preach like the guys here or somebody else that you admire. If God's done something in your life, you have something to share and the ability to make an impact. Let's take a look in Mark chapter 1. We'll be in verses 9 through 13 today. Mark 1, 9 through 13, and we're going to see how Peter describes this burgeoning new faith in Jesus. Mark chapter 1, starting in verse 9. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And when he came up out of the water, immediately, by the way, that's the first of 42 times Mark's going to, in a short gospel, is going to use this word immediately. Right? You can just sense Peter's kind of ready, fire, aim. He's just impulsive, like, let's go. The motor's revving 42 times. Here's the first of it. Immediately, he saw the heavens opening and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven. You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased. The Spirit immediately, there's two. The Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days being tempted by Satan. And he was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. Our passage today starts off with this, and when he came up out of the water, immediately he saw the heavens opening and the Spirit descending on him like a dove, and a voice came from heaven, you are my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. What stirred Peter to believe? Heaven opened up. What does that mean? I don't know. But if one could look and go, heaven's invading earth at the moment. Like, I'm thinking something inside of me goes, I gotta either run in terror or fall into this. Heaven opened. I don't know if like God just sort of went, but heaven opened in a visible way, and heaven didn't just open, heaven spoke into the earth. And heaven didn't just speak into the earth, heaven opens, speaks into the earth, and tells the earth what pleases heaven. That's my boy. And I'm pleased with him. What pleases heaven? Relationship. What pleases God? His Son. What pleases God about you? Relationship. Sonship. Daughterhood. Before he ever says anything about what Jesus has done, and by the way, it starts off and says, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee. They got to put all those kind of geographical qualifiers in there because at this point in time, nobody has any idea who Jesus is. He's been on the earth 30 years, and he has done exactly 0 miracles. He hasn't preached yet. No, I mean, his birth, pretty miraculous, pretty legit, right? But other than being born, he has no public ministry yet. Hasn't done anything amazing, hasn't spoken any powerful words, so they got to go, he's Jesus from like out in the country, right? I mean, he's like Jesus from like just out beyond St. Cloud. I almost went off the stage. He's like Jesus from out beyond. That's how far out beyond he was. Country folk. He hasn't done anything, and before he's done anything, God is pleased with him. 30 years of basic inactivity, and God goes, God, I love that guy. What does it take for God to be impressed with you? All the cool stuff you've done? All the mission trips you've been on? How many weeks in a row you've been in Kidstown? By the way, thank you for serving in Kidstown. No. You know what God delights in? That's my son. It's my daughter. We're in proper relationship. Not, I'm pleased with what you do, but I'm pleased with who you are. Jesus hasn't done any miracles yet. If this is your first time ever in a church, hang on, because he's about to do some awesome stuff. But at this point, he hasn't. But what he does have is the verbally, publicly stated approval of his Father. And it's amazing what you can do when your daddy approves of who you are. Some of us in here have not heard from our dads, you're my son. And I'm pleased with you just because we're in relationship. Some of us have not heard, hey, sweetheart, I love you and I'm proud of you, just because of who you are. And I get it, and that's hard. But I also think that's part of why before the Father affirms anything about what Jesus has done, he eliminates that and affirms his Son. And may I tell you, whether you've ever heard it from your earthly father or not, your Father in heaven would say, you look good today. You're my son. You're my daughter. And with you, I'm well pleased. We know experientially, look around you. When people have not heard those words from a father, it's crippling. And you can see the difference in grown adults when they have heard those words from a father, it's empowering. When you have not heard, I'm pleased with you just because we're in relationship, when you have not heard those words, people feel less than all of their days. When you have heard those words, you actually become more than. And if Father's Day is a struggle because you've not heard them, let me just say, on behalf of your Father in heaven, you're my son or my daughter. And just because you're you, I'm well pleased. Before Jesus did anything amazing, he was verbally affirmed by his dad. Dads in here, there is no telling what your kids can do, and there's no telling what they can become if they first know from you who they are. That's kind of an interesting time in history, both for us and at this moment when Jesus comes on the scene. Wasn't terribly unlike today. The society that they were living in was under Roman occupation, but they were religiously and culturally Jews. So they had set up their society and their system on some religious values, and some believed it more importantly than others, and some were, trusting in different things than others, but generally there was at least a generic sort of foundation of the things of God. But there were at least four really tribes almost, that not necessarily tribe, they have an actual definition of tribe, four sects, if you will, or four kind of divisions that had kind of grown up in their culture. And there was the religious group that was like uber religious. I don't know if you've noticed today, if you pay attention to this kind of stuff, but there are several denominations in America that are starting to come apart at the seams because they're fighting over stuff that's just kind of not super important. Right? Like this exact narrow, teeny tiny slice of doctrine, like I'm gonna just get rigid and dogmatic on it, even though the Bible isn't. And then you've got other folks that are also want to serve God, but they start focusing and majoring on the minors, and it's kind of this little slice that the Bible's not clear, but we've sort of figured it out. And I don't know, even though we both love God, I can't relate with you because you hold this strange, weird belief that I don't even think God's got an opinion on. Like there was this group, they were the Pharisees. And they all sort of had their little camp, like, you're in my group and you're in my group, and it was over small, little, minute, kind of insignificant in the big picture of walking with God details in this super uber religious group. And if we can just serve God exactly, perfectly right, then everything will go well in society. Then you had this other group, kind of on the other side, that were culturally religious, but they kind of looked at this Roman society and they're like, you know what, probably the best way is to just, go along to get along. In fact, maybe the best thing is if we just completely assimilate like them. Like, I get we'll serve God and God will be fine and he'll certainly understand, but why don't we just affirm everything they affirm and just live like them? And then somehow they'll magically, despite us being no difference between us and them, they'll somehow want to know about our God. And when I say they would affirm and want to assimilate with some things, that might pop a couple things into your culture, but we're kind of like Rome Jr. The stuff that was going on in their culture would make the wildest among us blush. But they just decided, this is probably the best way to get along. And then there was a group that had this kind of nationalistic, like religion meets politics. You don't know anything about that, but right, it's kind of the religious meets politics where God's awesome and he can do anything, but he can really do anything if our guy gets elected. You know what I mean? Like, and not only like our guy, and God really needs our help to get our candidate, because if our candidate and our party gets in, everything will work well. But God probably needs our help, so let's assail the character, let's assassinate, and they would literally assassinate. These guys were called the zealots, and they would kill people of the other side to get their person in. And if they didn't literally kill them, they would just undermine them on Twitter. Because if we can get our guy in plus God, it'll fix everything. And then there was this other group that looked at the problems in society and said, well, I'm sure God could do something about it. But you know what? If we all just so we had a top down with the zealots, if we all just kind of did a bottom up, and if we just, did a couple more marches and a little bit more justice, and if we just kind of fed people, and we don't need to use God's name, let's just kind of be really good and hug each other. And you got these 4 groups, and into that society, God, is in his infinite wisdom, does not send a pope to help them with their doctrine. God doesn't send a social justice activist to help everybody have a better life, and he doesn't even send them a president or a Caesar or a cabinet member to get all that straightened out. It's kind of weird. His solution for a society that's drawing up camps, none of which is necessarily holds the right answer, is to send a son. He sends a son. And what he commends, despite everybody's best efforts to fix the world, what heaven affirms and commends is proper relationship. This is my son. With him I am well pleased. Growing up, I called my kids lots of different things. You're going to be a world changer. You're a champion. You're going to do great. But you know what the foundation for any of those things ever coming true is? You're my daughter. Yeah, you can change the world, but whether you do or don't, whether it goes well or poorly, we're good. And I'm with you. And I'm for you, and just because of who you are, man, I'm pleased. In settling in our children, dads, who they are in relation to you, you then actually have a shot at calling them into something truly great. Because this text doesn't just stop with, that's my son with whom I'm well pleased. We have another immediately. And verse 12 says this, the Spirit immediately. That's my son with whom I'm well pleased. Then the Spirit immediately does something. It says the Spirit drove him out into the wilderness. And he was in the wilderness 40 days being tempted by Satan. That's a pretty wild thing. He was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. I affirmed you, but let me tell you something. We're not going to just sit here. Once he's affirmed, it says immediately the Spirit drove him. Now, this is recorded by some of the other gospel writers, and they use the word led, but their version of led is not like, come on, let's take a walk. It implies the same thing, drove. And drove isn't like, come on, get out there. It's like, it's led, but with a little urgency inside. Right? It's led, but with some fire in the belly. Good? Feel affirmed? Come on, let's go take it to him. Is essentially what he's saying. The Spirit, the same Spirit that came as this happy little dove. Heaven opened and the dove fluttered down. And the dove said, man, you're my guy. Let's go kick some butt. And he comes up out of the water, and the Spirit of God leads Jesus out into the wilderness for a fight. He didn't Jesus gets tempted in the wilderness. He didn't just kind of happen to be walking through the wilderness one day. God's Spirit led him out there looking for the devil. Oh, my friends, yes, God wants to affirm you, but let me help you out. His number one objective in leading your life is not for you to be safe. He actually loves you way too much for you to live a safe life. He loves you enough to allow you to be significant. And there are fights that need fought. And it is a father's job to help call that out. Once it's settled who you are, to let you know where you're supposed to fight. I don't know that my kids, you can ask Chloe afterward, but I don't know that they ever heard me say the words, be careful. I don't know that they've ever heard me say, be careful, until they started to drive and until they started to date. Now, every time they get behind the wheel, I'll tell them, be careful, and every time they go with some boy that I don't yet know, I tell him to be careful. I didn't tell him to be careful. I did tell him this, I love you, I'm proud of you, go for it. Dad, look how high I am in the tree. Oh gosh, I love you and I'm proud of you. Can you go higher? Look how fast I am on my bicycle down this hill. I'll bet you can go even faster. Dad, I want to be the best dancer in the world. Go for it. Somebody's going to be. Why not you? Dads, let me help you out. Your primary job with your family is not to protect them. It's to help them discover how far they can go. It's to help them to get out at the farthest limits of their potential. It's to walk in the greatest of their ability and to see what God looks like out on the edge. That's your job. Jennifer keeps them safe. Now, if they fell out of the high tree, I'd catch them. But I'm not telling them to stop climbing. You might say, Pastor Keith, that just sounds so weird. Did you read this passage? That's my son. I love you. With you, I'm well pleased. I'm proud of you. Let's go fight Satan. Let's go out in the desert so you can see what you're made of and so Satan can find out what you're made of. Oh, my friends, that's what a dad is supposed to do. Your walk and my walk with God was never meant to be safe. First and foremost, it is affirmed in who God has made me in relationship to Him. Once that's settled, and not until that's settled, once that's settled, oh my goodness, you got to know where to fight. And here's the thing, you might be saying, well, Pastor Keith, if you're encouraging bold risks in your children, aren't they going to do foolish things? No! People take foolish risks when they don't know who they are and are trying to prove who they are and are trying to figure out who they are. They go do dumb stuff. When it is settled deep in your soul who you belong to, I'm not going to be foolish because that's going to mess up who I belong to and how we relate. But if I know how I relate and you say go fight, sir, yes, sir. The Spirit of God said, let's go get them. Led Jesus out into the wilderness. Dads, encourage bold risk. Please do not bubble wrap your children and protect them from everything in life. Because there are some fights worth fighting and there are some risks worth taking, and they'll know the difference if they understand who they are in you and you lead them out into battle. It's my son. With him, I'm well pleased. You don't have to do anything to prove yourself to God. He just wants the right relationship. He's pleased with proper relationship. You don't have to do anything to prove yourself to God, but God will do things with you to prove yourself to you. Why did I encourage my daughters a little further and a little faster? So they'd know how far they can go. Why would God take him out and bring him to a place of, you might be familiar with the story, Mark just kind of, and Peter, they just kind of cut to the chase. He went out there, he won, and he moved on, right? But he goes out in the wilderness for 40 days, and the brother doesn't eat. And listen, when it's wilderness, this is wild, like high desert. Rattlesnakes, scorpions, wolves, lions, tigers, bears, oh my, sleeping on a rock, sand, dust, thirsty, dry, hungry. He hadn't eaten in 40 days. And then, of course, that's when the one who hates your guts, Satan, shows up. When you're beaten down and when you're scared and when you're tired and when you're hangry. Then he comes. Why in the world would God say, move out into this space to him? And why would he call you out into difficult spaces? Not so you can prove something to him, so you can know what it's like when the chips are down and the kingdoms of the world are offered to you, and you can make a decision and go, no, right with him is better than this. It's for you. So you know that there's nothing too difficult for you and God inside of you, and you know that no matter what temptation is given to you to alleviate whatever's empty on the inside, you know that, I actually don't need that because he's here. I don't need the kingdoms of the world and the praise of them because I've already heard I'm his son. Let you prove it to yourself. Dads, your kids won't have to run off and do stupid stuff and try to prove to the world who they are if you've already settled in them who they are. And if you've never heard those words from your earthly father, the one who was part of the process of bringing your life into existence, I'm so sorry, but let me tell you, the other one who was part of the process of bringing you into existence says those over you. You're my son. You're my daughter. And when you are full of that understanding, all the temptations around you just kind of seem silly. In fact, here's your notes here's your big idea if you're a note taker. When you are full on the inside, you won't fall to what's outside. When you understand the proper relationship, how God desires to relate with you, let me tell you, is there music playing? Sorry. Is there? Am I having a... Gabriel, is that you? Are you coming back? Sorry if that was somebody's phone, but I was just like, did Saskia sneak up here like part ninja, part Spider-Man and get up there and no. Anyway, sorry. When you understand who he is in here and you're satisfied and understand his satisfaction with the relationship, all of the things around you, be them terrifying or be them super appealing, you just don't fall to them anymore because they're less than what God has for you. And I know some of us, worship team, can you help me out? Now you can, Saskia, there you go. I know sometimes if we haven't heard those words from our Father here, it can be very difficult. And we can feel like we're in those wild places alone. But I like what said about Jesus in that moment at the end of verse 12. It says he was with the wild animals and the angels were ministering to him. I don't care how wild and chaotic and terrifying it is around your life, there is an and God is still there. I don't care how alone it feels. I don't care if the only thing you can see with your eyes is chaos, wild animals, and mayhem, and you don't see God's presence. And the angels of God are with his people. You're never alone in this thing. Ever. No matter how far you've walked to the right or to the left, no matter how weird it might be around you, God's presence hasn't left you and you've not left his sight. And The angels of God minister to us. He's for you. So let me ask you this as we close. This passage started off, and the thing that ignited faith in Peter was heaven opened. And God spoke. And Peter went, whoa. We're going to take a moment. We're going to worship a little bit more. And here's what's going to happen for you right now. Ready? Heaven is going to open over you. You don't have to sing. You don't have to stand. You can kneel. You can sit. You can just be quiet. But I want you to be aware of two things while we conclude with just a quick moment of worship. I want you to be aware of God opening up over your life. And I want you to incline your ear to what he might want to say to you. Some of you in here have not heard from somebody's mouth, love you. I'm proud of you. Some of you have just been trying to go for it, thinking somehow in going for it, you'll hear, I love you and I'm proud of you for going for it. The Spirit of God wants to speak to you in here right now. Right where you are, we're going to